Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of the Spurs Chat podcast. My name is Chris Cowlin. I'll be hosting this evening and I'll be joined by four very special guests. We are live on YouTube, X and Facebook. Please do get involved. Let us know how you are feeling right now as a Tottenham Hotspur fan. Of course, Ange Postecoglou sacked on Friday and it now looks like Thomas Frank will be the new Tottenham Hotspur manager. Now, let's go to our guests. Let's introduce them first of all. We've got Craig Dearman back with us. Craig, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all good. Yeah. A turbulent week as always at Tottenham. A lot to discuss. A lot to get
through for sure. And also we'll be going through all of the latest transfer rumours as well. We've also got journalist Josh Hughes back with us. Josh, how are you doing?
Johnson again. Johnson again. Ole, ole. I've not got over it. I don't know what that feeling is, but I've not got over it. I'm still buzzing. Couldn't care less really about the managerial news. I want to enjoy this summer with Spurs Europa League champions, and then we can think about next season when it comes around.
I'm glad that some people are still celebrating, Josh. I really am, because we have just won the Europa League, and I feel like the last couple of days people have forgotten that we've just won a European trophy because of the news about Ange Postecoglou, but we'll certainly get into it all. We've also got Gareth McGuinness back with us. Gareth, how are you?
All good, Chris. A bit like what Craig says there about it's been a bit of a strange week. I mean, we've had a wedding in Bilbao. We've had a funeral with Ange, and I think we're going to have a christening now with Thomas Frank. So it's been a party season, really, at Spurs. So I'm sure we're going to discuss it all tonight.
Well, great to have you here, Gareth. We've also got Si the Fox back with us. Si, how are you?
I'm really good, mate. It's the first opportunity I've got to say to everybody, I bloody told you so for ages about we were going to win it, and I was banging on about it. So I'm feeling rather smug, if I'm honest, and I'm kind of I'm split on the Ange Frank thing. So yeah, probably like most people in a bit of a daze. However, I will be celebrating until September, no question.
Well, I look forward to, Si, you're telling me that more trophies are coming under a different manager, because, of course, that's what we've got to look forward to, a new manager coming in. Craig, I'm going to come to you first of all, because I know some people, if you're not going to want us to talk about Ange Postecoglou, and I know some people, when I've mentioned Ange Postecoglou in the last couple of days, they're like, move on. But we haven't recorded an actual podcast. We did a fan show, a very, very long 5.5-hour fan show when Ange Postecoglou was sacked on Friday, but we haven't actually recorded a Spurs Chat podcast with, our regular guests talking about this news. So let's, you've all had a couple of days to reflect on this news about Ange Postecoglou going out the door despite winning the Europa League. But of course, a lot of people are going on about those 22 defeats in the Premier League, finishing fourth from bottom. Craig, and this isn't going to take up much of the podcast, I promise. Just give me your thoughts overall. How are you feeling as a Spurs fan right now, the last couple of days? Of course, we'll come on to Thomas Frank, etc. in a minute. But how are you feeling about the news about Postecoglou having had a couple of days to reflect?
Well, I mean, when it broke, I wasn't surprised, because it was quite obvious it was coming. Everything was leading towards that. Nothing had been said, and at Tottenham, when nothing's said, then there's obviously something going on. I'm still gutted that Ange has gone, because I think he just deserved that extra season for what he achieved. But as the weekend has gone on, you do have to move on. It is what it is. It's very difficult, though, because I totally disagree with this decision by the board and the club. Who knows whether Frank's going to be a success or not? We just don't know. But the sacking of Ange, I still think, was the wrong decision personally. I'd have liked to see him get a third season.
Josh, let's come to you on that same question. I know when you put a video out on this channel a couple of days ago, you seemed to thought that it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest gripe with it, for starters, is when we've got fans that have been very, very vocal in wanting him out for a very long time. And just because of what happened in Bilbao, it seems they've forgotten all the things they've said about him, all the things they've said about the team. And on that one result alone justifies another season, which, okay, I'm grateful for Ange. He can go down a Spurs legend. Absolutely. It was the night of our lives in Bilbao, and it was incredible to certainly Chris and Gareth to get to enjoy that with you out in Bilbao. But I wanted him gone after the Ipswich game, and I was quite consistent in saying I'm not sure he's good enough. And I remember speaking to Gareth on the phone saying, very early doors, I don't think he's good enough. And I didn't expect us to win the Europa League, and I'm bloody glad that we did. And, the way that he managed us throughout that competition was fantastic. But I think at this point, is this really sustainable? Where do you go from here? Is he really going to... Because my ultimate gripe is with the board, right? Is he going to get backed now that we're in the Champions League if he'd stayed? And all of a sudden, how predictable we were to beat, how easy we were to play against, that was all going to magically change. I'm not sure. So for me, I understand the decision, and I'm not going to be one of those people that just because of the sort of sentimentality and the emotion of winning the Europa League suddenly changed my tune. I think that this is probably a good opportunity, but it is a sliding doors moment. And ultimately, all eyes are going to be on the board, because once again, we're in another transfer window, and we're saying the same things we want to see from the board that we've been saying for the last God knows how many years. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not as big a deal as I think some people have made it out to be. And, I completely understand why now is the time. I think maybe might seem a bit harsh, but in my view, Ange Postecoglou is more akin to Juan de Ramos than, some of the other managers we've had. And that we cannot overlook the fact that we lost 22 games. We finished 17th in the league. That's not sustainable.
Josh, of course, I understand those 22 defeats in the Premier League, not good enough, and the league position, not good enough. But in the club statement, and of course, no word from Daniel Levy on Ange Postecoglou, which seemed a little bit strange to a lot of people. They come out and said that we want to be fighting on all fronts. Was that realistic? This season just gone, because, Ange Postecoglou put all of his eggs in the basket of the Europa League. I actually feel like Ange looked in and saw what every other manager has done at Spurs in the last 17 years and thought, I need to do things a little bit differently, and I need to lift a trophy because, the trophies are way overdue at Spurs. And by him doing that, did he do the right thing, in your opinion? Because he's fast-tracked Spurs to a Champions League spot. He's won that trophy. Of course, we not winning a trophy, Spursy, Dr. Tottenham, etc., etc. We all know the drill. And that seems to have been deleted, through Ange winning this trophy. So I understand all points of view, and I respect everyone's view on this, but I would have thought that he would have had enough credit in the bank to have a third season. He obviously wanted a third season, but I suppose my question to you is, have the board now put themselves under more pressure by saying we expect to be fighting on all fronts?
Of course they have, and rightly so, because the board has frankly got away with murder for the last few years, and it's not to do with the board at all why we won that Europa League. And as I said, Ange goes down a Spurs legend. In fact, give him a statue outside the ground as far as I'm concerned. But the truth is, every manager has the same issues at Spurs. They never get fully backed enough. They never seem to get a squad that's capable of fighting on all fronts. However, look at the teams that we were playing. This is not to discredit what we did in the Europa League, but does playing Bodo Glimt mean we have to lose the Premier League game before that? I mean, we're not talking about losing to the top Premier League teams. We're talking about losing to the worst Premier League teams. And I don't understand how we can go from one extreme to the other so sort of rapidly. And even in the Europa League, I thought we were competent and we were professional. I certainly don't think we were brilliant. There were few moments in that Europa League campaign where I thought we were playing absolutely brilliant football. We sort of just dug in and we sort of ground out results. And, you know, at the end of the day, we're Europa League champions and that's what matters. But I just think that the credit in the bank thing, you know, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure because Ange has won a trophy. If he'd stayed for a third season, what's the expectation? He's got to go and repeat that again. And of course, we want to see repeated success. But is he going to do that in the Champions League or is he going to do that in the Premier League? Because going from winning the Europa League to maybe winning a Carabao Cup, it's not got quite the same thing. And of course, the Spurs fans will take whatever silverware we can get. But if you're say your only silverware next season under Ange was a Carabao Cup,
yeah,
the league finish would have to be so much higher. So yeah, for me, that's my sort of confliction with it. Is I don't see how that was going to translate into necessarily more success. We'll never know, but yeah, I'm equally not going to get hung up over it.
I suppose there's a lot of people out there, including myself, that would have probably liked that third season to see Ange have a summer where we brought in, you know, experienced players, and that's exactly what he wanted to do this summer. Gareth, let's come to you on the Postecoglou sacking. Do you agree with it? How do you feel?
Well, Chris, I mean, we were on Bilbao, so emotionally, you know, we have more on this than anyone. You know, anyone that was on Bilbao or anyone that was at the stadium, like Craig, and they were part of those celebrations. You're always going to feel that emotion for the manager that delivered that success, especially after 17 years of no trophies. And, you know, so many times we got the finals and we didn't win them. You know, title races we never got over the line. And, you know, Ange was the manager to get us over the line. I can't agree with Josh in terms of, you know, the Ange ball style of play has long gone. It has really probably gone since January, February time. I can't think of too many performances in that time where you says, oh, you know, it was Ange ball at its best. The Europa League games, it was workman-like victories. You know, we beat Frankfurt by a penalty. You know, it was a penalty that got us over the line in that game. Bodo Glimt were massively out of their depth. We were very fortunate they probably played them in the semi-final. If we were playing Lazio, it may have been a much more difficult tie to get to the final. And as big as Man United are, you know, it was a Man United team that was struggling in the final, and we only got one shot on target in that game. We won it, like Josh is. We don't want to discredit Spurs, but, you know, we weren't playing anywhere near our best. The league form, I mean, the Crystal Palace game was just one of many games where we looked completely devoid of ideas. And I think you can see that a lot of the players liked Ange as a person, but that doesn't necessarily mean as a coach they were responding to him. You know, they might have liked his personality. I think everyone liked his personality. He was quite a good character. The media enjoyed him. Already he had a lot of runs as well. But he was kind of in the mold of Mourinho in terms of his box office in front of the media. Every football fan enjoyed listening to an Ange Postecoglou interview because you knew you were going to get something crazy in the interview. And he was either joking with the media or he was hammering the media. So I think when you take the emotion out of it, Chris, there's more evidence to suggest that this third season would be a massive gamble with Ange because of the many defeats. And it's not just about the defeat, it's how we were losing the games, Chris. We were getting absolutely battered. A lot of teams had sought out all their weaknesses. There's a source this week from BBC that says something about an opposition analyst. You know, Spurs were so easy to set up for when you went to play Spurs because you knew what Ange was going to do. And I think the club, I know what you're saying, Chris, and I kind of had this feeling as well until I've kind of thought about it more, trying to take the emotion out of Bilbao. And it's really hard to do that because it was such an amazing trip. You know, us winning the trophy as well was the crown jewel. But if we don't make this decision now, Chris, when is the next time we could be in the Champions League? So I think the club are looking at it from a proactive way instead of a reactive way. Because if we let Ange carry on and it goes pear-shaped next year, then, you know, getting back on the Champions League is going to be very difficult because there's no Europa League backup next year. It's only basically won the Champions League or finish in the top 4 or 5. And I think the club feel it maybe now the Champions League money, the Champions League extra funds, this might be the best time to make a change, give a new manager a new chance. And they obviously feel with Thomas Frank, they're getting an upgrade on Ange. And look, I know we're going to speak about Thomas Frank earlier, but he's a polar opposite to Ange Postecoglou in almost every way, from the chaos to the control, from the man that loves the media and maybe royal with the media, to a man that's very, very well spoken in front of the media. You never hear Thomas Frank getting upset with Rupert. So I think in almost every way, Ange is not very adaptable. Thomas Frank is. So I think they went for someone that's completely in the opposite mold to Ange Postecoglou. But whether or not he's at this level, he's no European experience, and we're going to speak about all those things. But I do think that, taking the emotion out of it, Chris, they've made the right decision. They sack Ange. Now, whether that right decision is Thomas Frank remains to be seen. But I do think, in terms of our future, we've probably made the right decision, as hard as it is they say it.
Okay, we'll come on to Thomas Frank shortly. Si, let's get your opinion on the sacking of Postecoglou.
Well, I've got mixed feelings about it, because you can't argue that that the league form was poor and the performances were poor. You just can't get away from that. So I appreciate that, but I can't. My anger is not at Ange or things in particular. It's just this, French shoe salesman, Philippe Fallope, that the board keep doing between styles, projects. You never win anything with constant change, on and on and on. So we might win an odd cup. We could win an odd cup this year, but you're not going to get the sustained performance if you keep changing the profile that you're at. And through all of this period, the one thing that hasn't changed is Daniel Levy and his way of operating. So I have a real problem with that. And, this is broadening the discussion out a bit. So was it right that Ange was sacked through the league performances? I think it's justifiable. Do you sack a winning manager? I probably wouldn't, because I think if you're working on a meritocracy, then they deserve the spoils of their gains. The other thing I would say on that is that Spurs don't operate in a meritocracy, and this thing about credit in the bank is totally non-existent at Spurs. You have Pochettino, who'd done a number of years of top four finishes, which is what the club wanted, and got us to a Champions League final. What was his credit in the bank? He didn't have any, did he? So, and then my other big contention is, I keep hearing all this crap about Spurs haven't got any money. That's an out and out lie, which I can prove, because I work in business and finance. It's a complete and utter lie. But here we sit with a board that ENIC have put in 120 million across the years that they've been involved with the club. And they've spent 105 million alone on paying off managers' contracts when they've left. So ENIC have only put in 15 million quid, and that doesn't account for any of the fees we've had to pay to release other managers along the line. So for me, that's where the problem lies with Spurs. And regardless whether it's Frank, Xavi, anyone else you want to name, 2 years' time, we'll all be sitting here having the same conversation again. I've no doubt.
So as much as the fan base is very, very split on the sacking of Ange Postecoglou, and it's been very split since he arrived, let's be honest about it, 2 years that he was there, the players in the last couple of days, I think Romero is one of the only players not to come out and publicly thank the manager or send the manager a message, or former manager, should I say. What do you make of that? What do you make? Because there was a lot of noise, and Ange Postecoglou used that word a lot, didn't he? Noise about not getting on with the players or losing the dressing room, etc. Some of the messages that have come out from these players, they were very much behind the manager.
Yeah, he never lost. He never lost the dressing room. That's just spurious mainstream media rubbish as usual. So I didn't pay any attention to that. And you could tell even with some of the games that they were playing that they cared about what happened. And let's be honest, even the games we lost with our backup players, that they didn't not try in certain areas. They just weren't good enough, and they aren't good enough, nor will they be good enough for next season. That's the issue. But I just don't. From all of the words that have come out, he did unite a group of players. Now, there have been united groups of players throughout football, throughout the ages. You know, I remember all the outpouring, because I'm an old git, of 1984-5 season when Keith Birkinshaw left us, and loads of players were, you know, waxing lyrical about him before he went. But the next season, we nearly won the league. So I wouldn't say that it affected their performance, but it's like I suppose with most things, it was a moment in time, a group of people that were behind what he was trying to do, which ultimately was to win a trophy. And I think it's just a load of, you know, like most things around Spurs, let's be honest, it's just a load of twaddle about, you know, people trying to clickbait, trying to get people to look at their articles, their stuff. And it will continue this summer, and it has already, with the nonsense about players that are on our radar, or, you know, we've got a concrete interest in, and all the other bullshit that goes out there, to be quite honest. None of it is particularly true. So I do think the players, you know, they didn't bail on him. You could see that. And if you just looked at their reaction at the final whistle when they were all together, they were a united group of men. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less.
Well, we will be talking about those concrete interest stories shortly.
Yeah. I can't wait.
Craig, before we talk about Thomas Frank, there is this message that Yves Bissouma has shared online. This is an exchange of messages with former boss Postecoglou. He said, Postecoglou says here, messaging Bissouma, "Hi, Biss, sorry I missed your call. I'm very proud of you. It was an honour to share a dressing room with you and appreciate how much you believed in what we were trying to achieve. I wish you all the very best for the future. I'll be following. Much love from my family to yours." Bissouma then replied and said, "Thank you, Gaffer, and thank you very much for everything that you did for me on and off the pitch. I'll always be grateful. The way that you believed in me and trusted in me was incredible. I'm going to miss you, but football life, a lot has to be said, but I think you know what I'm thinking about already. So I'm just wishing you the best for the future, and may God protect you and your family. Big boss, love." And then Ange Postecoglou replies and says, "Always by your side, Biss." Craig, let me ask you about the player reaction to Postecoglou and this particular piece from Postecoglou and Bissouma.
I think it's absolutely incredible, the player response to this. I've never seen anything like it, to be honest. When a manager goes, you see the odd message from players on social media when a boss leaves or he's sacked or whatever, but I've never seen anything like this. The respect and love Postecoglou had of all these players, by the look of it, it was pretty much everyone in the first team squad except Romero, which is odd, that's come out publicly on social media and put some really good words together and comments on social media saying how much they liked Postecoglou and gutted that he's leaving. The one from Biss, I hadn't actually seen that till today, but that is a heartfelt message, isn't it? Both ways. It seems to me like Biss is kind of saying that he don't want to stay anymore if he's not there. I was reading between the lines. So, but the thing is, there was rumours about Bissouma going anyway. So we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, it's very, very interesting, the response from all the players. Hearing comments online, people saying, "Oh, the players should revolt" and everything like that. I'm not sure that's going to happen, because players will just get on with it. You know, the king is dead, long live the king, and all that. But I think it's pretty phenomenal, the response from the players on the whole.
Well, of course, none of us Spurs fans will ever forget Ange Postecoglou, because, of course, he is only one of 3 managers to ever lift a European trophy at the club, Bill Nicholson and Keith Birkinshaw. So Ange Postecoglou will always go down as a Spurs legend, no matter what you thought of the 22 league defeats. Craig, let's stay with you, because over the weekend, things have been hotting up. Spurs apparently have been talking to Thomas Frank. Fabrizio Romano, the last report, has come out and said, here we go soon. Very soon. This is not going to be a problem. This deal is at its final stages. It is going to cost the club £10 million in compensation going to Brentford. What do you make of Thomas Frank? What's your initial reaction of this news that Spurs are even talking to Thomas Frank?
What the fact that he's in the frame for the job is I was a bit the thing is, we're all guided by emotions because we're human beings, right? And when I heard the news about Postecoglou, because I really just wanted him to stay, I don't think there's many managers in the world, apart from a couple I can think of, that would have really sparked my interest. So I was kind of like on a downer with Thomas Frank as soon as his name was mentioned, because that was the mood I was in. Over the weekend, I've kind of got a bit more used to the fact, look, we need a manager, obviously. The club have targeted Frank. We know they've liked him. Look, Thomas Frank is a good manager. I just hope that for him, that he's not thrown under the bus after a few games if things aren't going well, because the club have got to get this right. Yeah, like Si was saying, like Josh has said in the past, and Gareth, if the board doesn't get this one right, then they're going to be in real trouble, because they have to get this right. They've taken a very brave decision sacking Ange Postecoglou, the manager who's brought us European glory after 41 years. You know, that was a big call. So they've got to get this next appointment right. And if they don't, it could go sideways quite quickly. But the fan base needs to get behind the manager, me included, because it is what it is. You have no control over it. So you've just got to get behind it. And the fact Ange is gone, he's gone now. That's it. We've just got to get on with it and get behind Thomas Frank if it is him that actually comes in, which it looks like it is going to be.
Do you feel excited about the appointment though, Craig? Because when you go online, you speak to Spurs fans, you go in WhatsApp groups, etc., etc. It seems to me like it is like a 50-50 split of people being happy, people not being so happy. And it reminds me of when Ange Postecoglou was appointed. You know, people go away, they do their research on the manager, they find out more and more information about how he plays, styles, etc. You know, find out about the person, and then a lot of people warm to the idea. Are you excited by the appointment?
I wouldn't say I'm excited by the appointment. I think he's definitely a safe pair of hands in the Premier League, 100%. I think he will. We're not finishing 17th next season, that's for sure. We'll finish higher up the table. He's tactically a good manager. We all know him from Brentford. Even though Ange, I think, didn't lose a game to him, that doesn't really mean much as such. It doesn't mean Ange was a better manager than Thomas Frank. It just means Spurs were a better team on the day. So. For me, Thomas Frank has done wonders with that Brentford team, and we'll show you some stats later exactly how much money he spent and everything else. But was I excited? No, I wasn't. I wasn't excited. No. But as I say, I'm willing to give him the time and the support, because why be a fan of a club if you're not going to get behind the manager? The thing is, we've had our fingers burnt recently, haven't we, with managers? We know how many we've gone through. Nuno came in after 70 odd days or whatever it was. He started off brilliantly and then it went downhill from there. I'm sure it won't be the same with Frank, but the Brentford fans are going to be gutted that Thomas Frank is going, because he's kept them, he's made them stable, he's kept them a Premier League club for the last 5-6 years, never really in danger of going down. Obviously, I think last year they finished quite low, but on the whole they're pretty much established Premiership team. So yeah, he's going to be relishing this opportunity, and some would say he's probably earned the opportunity to manage a club like Spurs.
Yeah, there have been a lot of newspaper reports out, actually, and a lot of journalists have come out and said that exact line. He deserves a big opportunity, and it looks like it's going to be Spurs where he, gets that big break, like Postecoglou in a way. First, appointment at a top European club. Josh, how do you feel about this possible appointment? Go on, Craig.
I'm excited by it.
Sorry, Josh. I was just about to say. Sorry, Josh. I just realised I forgot to say something. The important thing with what the club have to do as well with Thomas Frank is back him, and back him properly. Mm-hmm. Because if he's not backed, we're in the Champions League, and that is going to be an utter disaster if he's not backed. And we need strengthening in key areas all over the pitch, really. But we all know the key areas where we need strengthening. The club have to back him, or else he's set up for a fall. Sorry, Josh.
We'll come on to that. Josh, how did you feel about when you saw the news that Spurs were linked with him? What do you make of him as a manager? And also, I think what we've got to talk about as well, that he doesn't have any Champions League experience, and his first game in charge of Spurs could be that, competitive game anyway. That Super Cup final against PSG, huge.
Massive. Yeah, no, I'm completely excited about it. And I agree with everything Craig just said at the end there. Of course, the board has to back him. They should have to back any manager. And this is my big question mark. And this has been something that I've had, umbrage to for years now with the board, is that they never seem to back managers all the way. And I seriously hope that they're not bringing in Thomas Frank just because he was used to working with a shoestring budget with the sort of Moneyball system at Brentford, because that is, don't get me wrong, he did very well there, but this is a different story. Now, what I like about Thomas Frank is the fact that he's adaptable. I've seen a number of Brentford games where they change the way that they play depending on who the opposition is.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of idea that because Brentford play a certain way, i.e., in a number of games would sit deep and then counter, that is what they are going to do, or what Frank would do at Spurs. I think that's just total nonsense. The reason why Frank played that way is because he was doing the best he possibly could with the players at his disposal, which on paper were not particularly good players. A couple of very good players in there, Damsgaard and Buemo and Wissa, but he did very, very good things with a team that probably was not expected to finish top half. They were in touching distance from a European spot, only a matter of points away. So I'm excited by that. We certainly don't need to worry, I think, about set pieces nearly as much, because as I said in my video this morning, I remember when we played Brentford at home, Brentford were practicing set pieces before the game. So I'm sure that's one thing we don't need to worry about. But actually, just I think as a personality, I think it's a breath of fresh air. I think similarly to Ange, he's not someone that necessarily goes with the grain. He kind of has his own way of doing things. And I quite like that. And let's not forget his record with player development too. So he's taken Brian Mbeumo, Ollie Watkins, Ivan Toney and Johan Wissa, just 4 players, for example, that he totally transformed. Damsgaard had a very good Euros back when, during COVID times. Then his career sort of went down a little bit. He moved to Brentford and he was their player of the season last year. He was superb last year. He's turned players who I thought were championship quality, players like Ethan Pinnock, into very, very solid, established Premier League players. So I think from a developmental point of view, there's a lot to be excited about. Let's not forget, he tried to sign Archie Gray and Brennan Johnson at Brentford. And so those are 2 players I think we can certainly look at positively. And when you look at what we do have in the squad, I think, experience is important now, because we do have a lot of young players, but there's also a lot to be excited. Bergvall, Sarr, I think both of them have enormous potential. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I get the perspective that maybe it's not the most glamorous name, but we've tried glamorous names, and under this ownership, it's not worked. So for me, this is a good appointment at a time where we are, as I said before, at a real sliding doors moment. And I would like to see us kind of welcome him in with open arms and sort of with an open mind as well, because of course there's a question marks over whether he can handle it at sort of a higher level and at a bigger club. But that was the same that was asked about Ange Postecoglou, and that was the same that was asked about Mauricio Pochettino as well. So and if we want to go about Champions League experience, let's look at Ange Postecoglou's Champions League record. I'm pretty sure he lost every single game with Celtic when he was managing them in the Champions League. So it doesn't always equate to, and his European record was terrible. And then he comes to Spurs, he wins the Europa League. So I think people can get kind of clouded by certain sort of lines of thinking. And where I'm at is, this is someone that is clearly adaptable. This is someone that comes across as a great guy, clearly very popular amongst players. I play football with a massive Brentford fan, and he is absolutely gutted to see Thomas Frank go, because this is a guy that came in as assistant manager, got them up from the Championship under very testing circumstances. I thought there were times I was thinking, surely this is the year Brentford go back down, because they can't sustain this. And he improved them year on year on year. So, I'm excited by the appointment. I think it's a great opportunity for him. It's a great opportunity for us. But as Craig said, the most important thing, we've absolutely got to back him wholeheartedly. We can't be sat here on another podcast midway through the pre-season tour with us not having our players through the door.
No. And I certainly hope that we're not sitting here in 18 months' time talking about yet another manager, because I'd like to see, Thomas Frank or whoever does come in, but it does look highly likely that he's going to be Thomas Frank, be backed in this window and make our squad very, very strong. Gareth, interesting words there from Josh. Josh said about, it's not all doom and gloom. This window now, whatever happens, should be the opportunity for Tottenham to kick on, because when you look at that league position, nowhere near good enough. We have won the Europa League. We are in the Champions League. So, we do need a number of reinforcements in, you need virtually 2 squads, don't you, for Champions League as well. But what do you make of the appointment of Thomas Frank? Are you excited?
Excited? Not probably would be pushing it. I'm intrigued, very intrigued, because myself, Chris, as a coach, you're always fascinated when you read up more about coaches, and I think we've heard quite a bit about Thomas Frank just from being in the Premier League for so many years now with Brentford. So I looked a bit deeper on some of the things that Frank does. So I'll just start going through it. I mean, this is, I think Josh mentioned that they're adaptable, and I spoke about it earlier. I think they've gone for someone in the polar opposite of Ange. Ange was always one of those managers where it doesn't matter what the opposition does, it's all about what we do. A lot of the training drills that people have spoke about, players that have moved on, I think, like Eric Dyer had spoke about, that was kind of all about how we play. Wasn't as much focus on tactical. It was more about the quick football and playing, and obviously there was a lot of work done around the press. But I think with Thomas Frank, you're going to see more tactical focus as opposed to technical focus. I think you'll see a manager that is very comfortable setting up different ways. I mean, one of the things that I found fascinating when I read about him was he likes to play with a back 3 or back 5, however you want to say it, when he feels he's up against a team with better players. So he almost focuses on what that team's going to do before he thinks about his own team. Now at Spurs, I'm sure he'll feel that he's got better players, better quality of players, so he might not have to do it as much. But I mean, Brentford's kind of a middle of the road team. So anytime they play a team in the top 7, top 8, top 9, he might feel that they have a lot stronger players. This is a manager that lost Ivan Toney last year, his biggest goal scorer. He's improved their league position despite losing Ivan Toney. So some of the styles he plays is a very possession-based game that's press-focused. When he feels he's in a game that is a very tight game and Brentford have every chance of winning that game. He's got so many great results against Man City, against Pep, when he's played a counter-attacking system with a back 5. And he can mix it up in terms of playing with 3 forwards, almost like 2 wingers and a striker. Or sometimes he plays with 2. Toney and Vissa would have played up front together at times. And one of those would drop back into the midfield because they wouldn't have as much possession. So he'd always make that midfield a bit stronger. So he would have a 3-5-2 out of possession, and he would drop the striker on the midfield then. So almost setting up differently, having an extra body in midfield when he didn't have the ball. He likes to play with fast wingers, goal-scoring wingers, and I think that's one of his, Josh mentioned it, player development. I mean, what he's done with Mbeumo and Vissa and Toney, those 3 in particular, is very impressive because they're probably all players that no one really heard of before they came to Brentford. And he's also very good at dealing with players. Obviously, Brentford have to sell players at times. They've obviously got a very good recruitment model there, Brentford. Brentford and Brighton have 2 of the strongest. But Thomas Frank's quite a big role in that they play, and he's got a real eye for talent, hence why he wanted Archie Gray. Brentford like to overload the wide areas quite a lot, reduce space in the middle of the pitch, and press man-to-man. So I think that's some of the things you'll see. You'll see a lot of overloading out wide, try and gain 2v1 advantages. Josh mentioned as well, set pieces. He's not afraid. They go, do you know what? Let's load the box up and we'll go along through. He's almost like we will do anything we can to gain an advantage or to get an outcome. It's not necessarily about always playing great football. It's all about winning a game of football. And I think that's why Thomas Frank's very, very highly rated. One of the other things I think is very important is his characteristics, and that's why Spurs have selected him. So he spoke a bit about his style of play. For me, characteristics are massive in football. It's all about building relationships. A lot of players at Brentford are very, very happy with Thomas Frank. I think he's a very different character to Ange. I think Ange is one of those managers where you'd love him to go to the pub with you and have a pint with you, almost like a night out. Whereas I think Thomas Frank's more of a father figure, and that kind of, he's a very gentle, soft-spoken type of manager, but also gets the respect of the dressing room. And I think when you see all the media interviews he does, even if a decision goes against Brentford, he's very relaxed in front of the camera. So he's very well media trained. You never really see him exploding or getting it. I think some of the things that some of the mistakes that Ange made, Chris, was some of the statements he made in the media. And, the set pieces, we don't care about set pieces. Every time he conceded a goal from a set piece, it was a talking point. And you could see Ange was getting more and more frustrated. He put himself under massive pressure with that statement, he says, and he goes and delivers it. But then he goes and says season 3 is going to be better than season 2. And then he corrects himself afterwards because he thinks, I might not be here next year, because sometimes they kill off the main character. So I think Thomas Frank treats the media with a lot more respect, and he's very calculated with what he says. And I think he's very calculated in his approach to games. His attention to detail is meant to be absolutely outstanding. His player development, he focuses on a lot because he feels if he gets individual development to a level where he wants it, that will only improve the team development. So every player knows their role in that team. I think that was one of the things that Ange neglected at times. We were kind of scratching our heads going, we could probably see what was going to happen and we were going to make mistakes. I don't think there was enough focus from Ange at times to fix the mistakes that we kept seeing week in, week out. And he would kind of deflect it all the time in terms of, if we scored 3 goals but conceded 4, we played well. I think Jamie Carragher pointed that out. He says, of all the managers I played for, if we conceded 4 goals at home, I will be scratching my head if my manager says after the game we played well. So I think that's one of the things that you'll see with Thomas Frank. And one of the things I found quite interesting was, and this is how much we focus on his attention to detail, he doesn't like players shooting from outside the box, because if he studied the stats in terms of goals inside the box, the outside the box, and the percentage of shots outside the box that go on the goal. And he's openly said that because somebody asked him why Brentford don't shoot a lot outside the box. And he says it's something that we instruct them because we've looked at all the data and a lot of goals from outside the box. Obviously, a lot of shots go wide or over the bar or block shots, whereas he focuses on getting the ball into the box before we shoot. So
can I just jump in, Gareth, on that?
Yeah.
Something you just said there, because I remember that exact thing. He said that it was after, I think it was Janelt scored, funnily enough,
yes, absolute banger.
And that point is really, really crucial about Frank. Everything about Brentford and Frank was about the data. It was data-driven recruitment. It was data-driven approach to football. And the other thing that you said, so first of all, you can expect Spurs to have a very data-driven approach, which is something that I'm sure, Levy will be interested in for sure. The other thing that you mentioned was about how relaxed he is in the media, which is really interesting because I completely agree. He seems very relaxed in the media, but on the touchline, he's full of energy, and he always seems full of energy. And this is someone that seems to, and people I know who have gone to interview him. I've played football with now Athletic Spurs journalist Jay Harris, who was very, very complimentary about Thomas Frank, because he used to be the Brentford reporter, about that kind of energy and that vibe that he has. But also he has this habit of getting players to perform at sort of 10, 15% above what is expected of them. Every single Brentford player has exceeded expectations and every single season. So that says a lot in terms of what he is like as a character. When you've got that, obviously, that data-driven approach, and you've got this adaptability, but then you add this kind of other element, which is him as a person and what he comes across like to journalists and to the media, but also clearly to players, because he's improved so many players and he's managed to convince all of the players to get behind what he's doing and perform at a higher level to probably what everyone around them would expect. And even Brentford fans, I think, would agree that they've, outperformed what was expected of them. So I think, linking to everything that Gareth has just said, I think that there is actually a real case for being optimistic about this, and this is why I don't understand some of the abuse that he's already been getting on social media. I think this is something that we can be very, very excited about, and bringing in a big name does not always guarantee success.
Chris, can I just say on the final point there? The day I turned with Ange, where I thought he should probably leave, was the Everton game, because it looked like we went to a back five that day and we never even trained it once. I can't see that happening with Thomas Frank. I think the players will know the different systems. And Chris, you're asking about the Spurs fans' reactions. Sometimes I think it's quite interesting. They listen to the rival fan reactions. And a lot of rival fans, Liverpool fans that I've spoke to, Man United fans, even an Arsenal fan, says to me, Thomas Frank is a very, very good coach. So sometimes
I was going to say exactly that, Gareth.
Fans say. But
yeah,
that's the lowdown on Thomas Frank.
Yeah, no, that very insightful. Thanks for that, Gareth. I was going to say exactly that. You know, everyone, regardless of whatever team you support, you know that Thomas Frank is a decent manager and he's done a very, very decent job. And as Josh and Gareth have both said, you know, unsung heroes in that team. You know, they, always seem to be a very hard-working team, very hard to break down a lot of the time. Interestingly as well, Gareth, Thomas Frank uses a set-piece coach, which will be the music to the ears of Tottenham Hotspur fans. And plus, as you both stated there about data, the Times have stated today that Johan Lange has been leading the search for Tottenham's new manager. Of course, he has worked with Thomas Frank before, so they know each other extremely well. Other reports have stated, including Fabrizio Romano today, that De Zerbi was asked about the job. He wanted to stay at Marseille. Andoni Iraola, he wanted to stay at Bournemouth, and apparently it was between Marco Silva and Thomas Frank. So Daniel Levy likes Thomas Frank, so that is why they have chosen this route. Gareth, can I just ask you about that, because we mentioned there about unsung heroes. The players do work extremely hard, and as Josh just said there, you know, the players always go beyond expectations.
Well, Chris, you have to look at some of the results that Brentford have had in their Premier League era. The first game in the Premier League, to beat Arsenal at home. I think he either done one double or maybe even two doubles over Man City. They beat Man City quite a few times. I think they beat Liverpool 2 or 3 seasons on the trot at home. I think Spurs are probably been falling off with one of the teams that Brentford maybe haven't enjoyed playing. But if they've had so many massive results, and if you look through the players they have to the opposition on the day, there probably wouldn't be one player you'd pick to get on the Liverpool team or the Man City team on that day, but they still were able to go and do a number. And consistency. I mean, I think they've only really had one per season. I think it was 2 seasons ago they finished 16th, but I think they've just missed out in Europe twice in the 4 or 5 years they've been in the Premier League. So they've been an established Premier League club without spending a lot of money. Now, I know Josh was right to point that out as well, that you would like to think that it's not just bringing them on because we know we can get the best out of what we have here without having to spend bucket loads. But I think there is a realization within the board, within ENIC, that if we're going to compete on all fronts, you're going to need significant investment, because, you know, every club up near the top end of that table has had significant investment. You know, Newcastle have had it. You know, they've been out and spent a lot of money on Isak, a lot of money on Gordon. You know, Liverpool, maybe not so much, but if you go back to the Klopp era, you know, Van Dijk and Alisson were brought on at big fees. And then you look at Man City are spending again. Liverpool look like they're going to have a big summer. Arsenal spent quite a lot of money under Arteta. So look, it's. I think if we can get it right and Frank can get the players on board, and I think they'll enjoy that attention to detail, because if you've got a manager that's very acute and very detailed, then I think it's only in the interests of the players they listen to him. And I think because you've got so many young players in there, they'll be fascinated to hear what Frank's, you know, what's on his head and the knowledge he's got. And if you listen to all the coaches that speak about him, I think he's generally well liked within the game and well respected. And as you say, Brentford are a very, very hard working team. And you know, you rarely see Brentford get absolutely battered in any game. You know, everyone that plays Brentford, either home or away, knows they're in for a tough game. Yeah. And I think if he can make us, you know, unpredictable, I think that was one of the most disappointing things about Ange. Was at times even when it was going wrong, you just knew it was going to be the same kind of tactics every week. And I think Frank's one of those managers that is very flexible in games. You know, he might change something at halftime if it's not going well. He can switch systems, and I can guarantee, you know, if Spurs line up in a back 5 1 week and a back 4 the next week, they'll know both systems inside out. It won't be just the back four isn't going well here. We're just going to chance it and go to a back five like we did at Everton, because that Everton game was an absolute mess. It looked like the players hadn't even trained the system once or had very little time of it, because Everton were absolutely going through us in that first half. And I thought that was the day that Ange was very fortunate. He hung on to his job. Probably the second half where we got those goals back at the end kind of peppered over the cracks and only finished 3-2. I think if that had ended up being 4 or 5-0, which it could have been, it might have been Ange's last stand that day. So look, I was disappointed about Ange, Chris, because of the emotion that we spoke about. But as somebody we both know would say, it's done now. It's time to move on. And
well, that's where I want to come in, to be quite honest.
Yeah, we have to get behind Thomas Frank now, and this board has to get behind Thomas Frank. And I'll be fascinated to see the length of the contract, because I know contracts don't mean a lot of times. Ange was given 4 years, but I think Thomas Frank is very much a project, long-term based manager. Because if you look at his start at Brentford, wasn't that great, but they trusted him to get it right, and he did get it right. And pound for pound, you could argue he's been the best manager in the Premier League for the last 4 or 5 years.
So I know you've been itching to talk about Thomas Frank. I know you like your finances as well. Thomas Frank's Brentford, the second lowest wage bill in the Premier League, and he still guided them to 10th in the Premier League table. Some people will say 10th. Well, that's not good enough. But a club like Brentford, with deepest respect, that's a pretty good finish. And as Josh said earlier, I think a lot of people expected Brentford to go down. And as seasons have gone on, he seems to have made them a very strong team, very hard to beat. And as Gareth said there, the flexibility with his tactics. What do you make of this possible appointment?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think that not spending big budgets is music to Daniel Levy's ears, isn't it? And getting the best out of it. One thing I would say, and if you look at the top 10 teams in the Premier League last season, so if you go Liverpool slot, Arsenal Lego head, Pep Guardiola is the outlier in this. Chelsea Maresca, Newcastle Howe, Aston Villa Emery, Nottingham Forest Nuno, Brighton Hertzler, Bournemouth Iriola, and then Frank was in at 10th. The outlier Guardiola aside, the rest of them, in my opinion, are all coaches. They're not managers. They're not, stand on the side and watch it go by type guys. So I'm optimistic with this, that we will be putting a coach in charge of our players. And some of our players have got, even with Ange's words, have got significant growth to come. So if you think about your Bergvals, your Greys, you've got Donnelly, you've got Mikey Moore, etc. In my opinion, the optimistic side of me says they're in good hands to be developed as professional footballers and young men, because you don't hear of any, negative connotations in the Brentford ranks, bar Tony and his betting thing, but that's a personal thing rather than anything Frank was involved with. So I think that if you put a coach in charge of good players, in theory, they should develop on to be even better players. And I think that, for all his faults, people can say about Maresca, but some of the players that he brought through last year and the way that he got them to play was better than they did the year before. So coaching, really does matter. So I am optimistic on that front. And the other side of me says the tactical awareness, I get it. But again, I don't want to keep going back to the Ange era about tactics. I don't even want to go back to speak about Ange anymore, to be honest. But Si, when Craig said earlier, he considers it as a safe move. It seems a very sensible one as well, doesn't it? Yeah, it is sensible. Of course it is. And, like I said, the list of coaches I just gave you, they have all done well at their clubs because they are good coaches and they've got other good coaches around them. That's where I think the key to the Frank appointment will be for us. Now, for me, and, we've touched on it a number of times here, if you want to compete on four or all fronts, as the club statement put it, then you have to have a squad where when you're rotating players, the quality doesn't drop significantly from one to the other. And also, I think that, you know, we could all name players that for various reasons we want or wouldn't want, and we'd like to change around. But it comes down to the philosophy of the club. You can't keep buying, you know, younger youth players and expecting them to compete in the Premier League and then the Champions League on a Wednesday night. It will not happen. And, you know, I was talking about coaching young players. You know, we don't know what Yang's going to do. We don't know what Alfie Devine's going to be like coming back. We don't know what Luka Vuskovic is going to be like coming back. But what you do need is a strong coaching network around those guys for them to fulfill their potential. In my opinion, again, we'll never know because we don't work with them on a daily basis. Have players improved under Ange? There's a big argument that they didn't. I think that's rather harsh because there's some that did, but, you know, matter of opinions, everybody's entitled to theirs. But I do think that Thomas Frank will coach the players, and I think there'll be better players for it because of what Gareth and Josh said. We won't be playing one system. They will be expected to be flexible, and they will have to engage footballing brains rather than automaton processes of, you know, do this, go down the line, cross it in the middle, someone taps it in. That they will need to be developed to think a little bit. So, yeah, I think I'm optimistic that Frank will do good things for us. The other thing with Frank, and in terms of the budget, if you actually look at their budget compared to their turnover and Spurs with our budget compared to our turnover, he never has had the players of the quality that he's going to get at Spurs one way or another, whether they're the internally development ones or, you know, if we did carry on this folly of, you know, buying up all the youth players, then he's going to get a better quality of player to coach. So you would hope that, you know, the development that he's made with the Brentford players could be significantly greater if the materials that you're working with are of a higher nature. It's the old, you know, make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. You know, he's made the silk purse, you know, with great respect to Brentford. Now we're talking about you're going to be polishing diamonds, aren't you? So are you a diamond cutter or are you a seamstress? And so's the sow's ears up, in my opinion.
So there's been a report published in the last couple of hours, and it states Thomas Frank wanted guarantees about how Spurs would operate with him in charge. Thomas Frank will not have the final say on every deal, but he wanted to be a part of the process, and Spurs have agreed to this. Is this just a part, and I'll go to all of you on this because I feel like it's an important point about, you know, club signings. We go back to Antonio Conte saying about club signings. Ange Postecoglou came out a number of times and said, every single deal gets run past me. Now, we are seeing all of these reports. We are seeing lots of reports out at the moment stating that Spurs are interested in this player, this player. We'll come to those stories shortly. Is it important that a manager does actually pick their players?
Has to, because if they're judged by their results, then, you know, they've got to have the final say on players or not. Now, this is where I struggle to believe. So let's just look at this situation. We have had 24 years of evidence that says that a certain Daniel Philip Levy cannot keep his hands out of messing about with playing matters, doing deals, and, you know, being the icon in his own head that he is. Now, I just can't believe that even if they give Frank the assurances that Daniel Levy isn't ultimately going to say, well, you know, we've got £100 million budget, mate. You've spent it all. That's it. I fail to see that without external investment or a significant uplift in either the investment being translated into players or increasing the wages to turnover ratio, how you can significantly improve it. So if Daniel Levy tells me the sun's yellow or the grass is green or the sky's blue, I don't believe him. That's kind of where I am with it. So,
just very quickly. So, where do you stand, or what's your prediction on this? Because we saw a report from the Telegraph the other day stating that they believe that ENIC could actually inject money into the club this month or this summer transfer window. But we've also seen reports from various outlets stating that we have to sell before we buy players this summer. But we also had Kieran Maguire, finance expert, great guy in what he does. We had him on the channel last month, and he said, regardless of whether Spurs got Champions League football, we could easily spend £100 million this summer.
Yeah. So going back to your specific questions, do I believe that ENIC will put significant funds in? Okay, well let's just go back 24 months, well 30 months probably now, when we were going to put 150 million quid in, and that was going to be available for a couple of capital projects and investment in the team. Well, actually only 100 million went in. That's what really happened. Not more, not less. So do I believe that ENIC will put money in? Only when I see it. That's my big issue. All of my issues are around the board and the way they behave. Now, I've been banging on to you about the figures for a couple of months now. Do not believe what Daniel Levy is telling you, because Spurs have money. Spurs, if they wanted to, from self-generated money, would have a transfer budget of somewhere between 150 to 175 million pounds this summer. That's a fact, extracting information from their accounts and doing a little bit of extrapolation on the figures. And I find it really fascinating that people say Spurs haven't got money. And so let's just go back. I'm sorry to be boring on this. The 2024 accounts that went in. So Spurs' revenue was, I think it was 150 to 200 million on ticketing and match day money coming in. Everybody seems to have forgotten that went up by 6% in this current season. So if you multiply that out, you're already up. The Europa League money pretty much wipes out the loss in league places where we are, and then you've got the fact that concerts. There's been 8 more concerts in the corresponding period this year to last year, where we make £2 million per concert when we're renting the stadium out. And that, doesn't always include the beer money either. To say we haven't got money is insulting to every Spurs fan on this planet. It's just rubbish. So no, I won't have it, but ENIC investing money, I'll believe it when I see it. Do we have money? Oh, categorically we do. No doubt about it. And don't believe Daniel Philip Levy's bullshit. That's my final statement on this.
Craig, let's come to you. Before we talk about Thomas Frank a little bit more, what do you make of the departure of Donna Cullen? And, of course, Vinay Ventatesham has now, started work at the football club. And as I mentioned, Johan Langer has been actively trying to find a manager for Spurs. Do you feel like Daniel Levy and some of the board members have actually given more control to others now?
I mean, it's possible. Nobody really knows for sure, do they? Rumours are saying that Donna Cullen, this retirement was planned a year ago, and Daniel Levy convinced her to stay on for another year. There's other reports to say that she was pushed. I mean, none of us really know. It's a lot of guesswork. Who really does know? I've never been a fan of Donna Cullen, to be honest with you. Not that I know her, but from what I've heard about her, it's difficult to have an opinion on somebody you don't know, to be honest with you. But the people need to let go of certain jobs that they're doing, Mr. Levy included, and this club needs to run like a football club, because I'll come back to it again. Going back to your earlier question as well, the manager 100% needs to be able to choose the players he brings in, because he'll understand, not saying Johan Langer wouldn't, but Frank or whoever comes in will understand the tactics you want to play, the dynamics, how those players react with each other in the dressing room. The manager, you would hope, would know a player's technical ability, would have done their own research on it, the personality, do they fit in the squad? Does the player align with the manager's philosophy? Surely the manager's got to have a big input into this. I've never been one of a fan of purely the sporting director just choosing players and giving the manager them and just saying, there you go, crack on with that. It doesn't work. It results in poor signings. We've seen it time and time again. And the manager 100% needs to be on board and play a big part in what players come in. But as going back to the board and Vinay Venkatesham apparently was well regarded down the road, done a lot of good work at Arsenal. So I'm looking forward to him coming in. Well, I think he started now and actually putting his stamp on this club and showing us what he can do. And just hopefully we can see some changes, because everybody out there in the viewers and the listeners, all of us have said it's rinse repeat. We've all said that phrase. You've said it, Chris, Gareth said it, Size said it, Josh has said it, everybody else has said it. It's just rinse repeat. Every 2 years we have a new manager, and it's the same bloody story every year. New manager comes in, the manager isn't backed, manager struggles in the first season. Second season, manager really struggles.
They must also be a little bit frustrated with it themselves, though, Craig. Like, keep reappointing a manager every couple of years. It must be a really boring cycle and process for them as well. But for us fans, we don't want to keep hitting a reset button. We need to be, stable. It is about stability and moving forward and showing that ambition in transfer windows. And like I said, winning the Europa League, it should be the chance now to really kick on, push on. And, like I've said many times, that trophy parade was incredible. We were standing there, watching that bus coming down, and we want more of that. I'll tell you what, as a fan, I want to be feeling like that, year in, year out, lifting those trophies and seeing those players going down the high road on that bus. It was amazing. So, we definitely want to see more of that. Before we go on to transfers, Craig, I know you've done a lot of research this afternoon on the types of players that Thomas Frank has bought. You're going to go through those now?
Yeah, let's put this first one on the screen. So, just a bit of information about Thomas Frank himself. Obviously, he's Danish. Joined Brentford in October 2018. He's 51 years, same age as me. What a good age. A great year to be born, by the way. Absolutely. Premier League seasons, he's only had 4, because he was actually assistant manager before that. But here's his record: 152 Premier League games, 54 wins, 38 draws, 60 losses. Goals for 228 and goals against 224. So just in the positive for that, +4. These are the players that he's brought in to Brentford since he's been manager. Now, I won't bother reading them all out. I'm sure you can all read them. And there is another page of these. But you'll notice a lot of these players probably aren't really household names, or certainly weren't when they were brought in. You got Damsgaard that Josh was talking about. You've got there's another one, a Wissa there, the number 13, Brian Mbeumo, of course. But you've got to look at the money down the right hand side of each of these pictures and how much Brentford have paid for it for each player. It's not a fortune. So he has been working on. Let's go to the second page. He has been working on, I wouldn't say shoestring budget, because if shoestrings cost that much, I wouldn't mind them. But he's not really paid a lot of money for these players. And as I say, some of them you would never have heard of. I see Neil Maupay on that list. He's one of my hated Premier League footballers of all time. But of course, Christian Eriksen there, our number 23, went back to Brentford after his heart scare. And there's plenty of players on that list that you won't have. Like I say, that it just goes to show. Let's go back to the first one. Their top signing, 33 million euros. That's their club record signing.
Yeah.
So 33 million euros. What's that? Anybody got that? Was that 28 million quid?
Craig, that was actually the replacement for Ivan Toney, and he got injured at the very start of the season and missed more or less the whole season too as well.
Yes. Yeah. So
And they still finished 10th.
And that's what probably the when you think about it is quite encouraging, that Frank is obviously a good coach as well as a manager. So, he actually trains the players well, and so the players know what they're doing, because, I mean, look at these players that he's got to finish 10th. So you could argue, what is progression? Well, I mean, we can come on to that, but what is progression for Tottenham under Thomas Frank? What is the expectation? If he finishes 10th but no trophy, is that progression? I'll leave that one for you guys to answer. But right, so he was main club there. I can't actually read it. B8311, whatever that is. And then it's basically the youth manager. This is going back to 2006 and 8, but more in recent times. Denmark under 16s and Denmark under 17s and under 19s. He was with Brøndby for just over 3 years, and then Brentford assistant manager, as I say, and to this day he's obviously the Brentford head coach. And all the stats are there: 317 matches, 136 wins, 71 draws, 120 losses. Is that? My eyes are going. So that's his stats. And of course, this is interesting. He's purchased 47 players, 34 of those players with a fee, total expenditure just over 300 million euros, which is an average fee per player of just, nearly 9 million euros.
Wow.
And the market value increase of each player. Now, look at this. This is really interesting on the right. Market value increase of Ivan Toney was nearly 50 million. Boyan Bremo, 37-ish million. I mean, there's the list. Just have a look at it for yourself. So these are the players you could say that he has improved since the player came to the club. So yeah, a lot really to be encouraged about, I would say. He's clear, as I say, he's clearly a coach. He's clearly somebody who improves players. And the figures on the right-hand side of the screen will be music to Mr. Levy's ears, no doubt. But yeah, certainly a very experienced and good coach should we get Thomas Frank over the line.
Great presentation. Great presentation.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Craig.
Thank
Josh,
you.
Asking you about those stats and about that player list that Craig has mentioned there. Obviously, it seems pretty obvious now that we want him to be a part of that transfer activity for Tottenham, choosing the players, identifying those players, working very closely with Johan Lange, who of course he knows. But do you think that's all down to Thomas Frank? Is it down to Brentford, or is it a mixture?
I think it's a mixture. Obviously they took forward this money ball system, very, very similar to what Tony Bloom has done at Brighton. It's it's quite well documented, the history between Benham and Bloom. Both used to be very good friends, and then had a bit of a disagreement, and both have since taken their respective clubs and run them superbly. But I think I don't know too much about the identification aspect and what role Thomas Frank had within that, but the improvement aspect is the most important thing here. And when you showed that list of players, I forgot about Keane Lewis Potter, who was an attacking player at Hull and ended up playing left back or left wing back for large parts of last season and did very well there. So, it just shows that he's able to not just improve players, but he can change players' positions if need be. There are a couple of other things that I wanted to throw out there was, of course, David Raya is a player we haven't spoken about, and we all know he's gone on to become one of the Premier League's top keepers. And on that set piece coach point that you made much earlier in the podcast, Arsenal's be all and end all, that Nicholas Jova, their main man, probably more influential than Mikel Arteta himself with the amount that Arsenal play for throw-ins and corners, was a Brentford coach. That was someone that worked under Thomas Frank. So clearly he is a good person to work with and work for. But I'm sure, as I think someone mentioned in the comments, he will definitely be part of that process. And as you mentioned from that report, and I completely believe that to be true, he will want to say, I don't think it's a case that the board will sign players and he won't have a say. Of course he'll have a say. But I think what Spurs do, and this is not, I don't want to praise the board at all for this, because in fact, it's quite the opposite. Spurs always seem to end up with that fourth, fifth choice player rather than that sort of target number one. And what Daniel Levy will be loving is the fact that if we can't get those targets, whoever we end up with, there's a good chance that Thomas Frank will improve that player. So, and also, again, this is not where Spurs want to be, but they're probably looking at it as a very sensible appointment from the perspective of they lost Ivan Toney for a lot of money and they improved without him. And, obviously we lost Harry Kane, and there's that kind of comparison of Spurs being a selling club and Brentford being a selling club, and yet he's still managing to get a lot out of the team. Of course, at Spurs, we hope it's going to be totally different, though, and then we're not going to be selling our best players. But one player that, has been mentioned, and a lot of us fans have speculated what will happen is with Cuti Romero. Will Romero stay at the club, or will Romero go? And if Romero is that sort of big name player that may leave Spurs this summer, who do we get in to replace him? Well, whoever we do get in to replace him, if he did go, we could probably be quite positive at the prospect of Frank improving them and someone else coming in and doing a good job. So this is not to say that, because I know that what I'm saying actually sounds like, is Thomas Frank just a yes man? Is he someone that's just going to appease the board? I'm actually saying quite the opposite. I think what we are looking at is someone that will fight tooth and nail to improve things and make a difference regardless of the circumstances. So either way, I think we've got a lot to be positive about.
Yeah, I can also imagine, Josh, that a potential manager going to Spurs, or someone being approached for the job, or them interested in the job, would have 101 questions that they want answered before they sign on that dotted line, particularly what they have seen in previous years, particularly that they've seen that Ange Postecoglou's just won a trophy and just been sacked. So I feel like there's, a lot of questions to be answered. Gareth, I'm going to ask you two final questions before we move on to transfers. Brian Reamer, a former member of Thomas Frank's coaching staff, he said, Tottenham have always been my favourite club. We always joked about it. If we moved on from Brentford, it would be for Tottenham. Thomas deserves that chance. He has done a fantastic job. I wanted to ask, 2 years ago when we appointed Postecoglou, why didn't we go for Thomas Frank then? And also, from what you know about Thomas Frank now, about his playing style, tactics, etc., who's going to be the winners in this Tottenham squad and who's going to be the losers?
I think Scott Munn had a heavy influence in the Ange appointment, being Australian. I think he pushed that out. I think it's documented that he wasn't Levy's first choice. I think it was well documented that Arne Slot was Tottenham's first choice, and for whatever reason, either Spurs didn't convince him enough, or he just wanted to stay on at PSV. Not PSV, sorry. It was at IF, or no, where was it? Feyenoord, right? Feyenoord. And then maybe he felt that if he held out, he was going to get a bigger job, and he got that with Liverpool. But I think that was the one that he was promoting, the Ange thing, and probably saying to Daniel Levy, look, the fans are desperate for attacking football, and you're not going to get more attacking than Ange, unless maybe Ange or Bielsa, probably the two most attacking coaches we've probably seen. So I think in a lot of ways, Ange was what was needed to get the fans back on side, because I don't think we really had that relationship with Conte and Jose. There might have been at times when the team was doing well, but I don't think the majority of the fan base ever committed to that. There was a lot of games where you weren't enjoying the football. Whereas with Ange, even there was games where we were losing, there were still people coming away from the stadium thinking, well, I've seen a good game, and we were playing on the front foot. And I think for the especially in that first season, a lot of fans were just happy to see attacking football. So I think Ange ticked a lot of boxes that way for Scott Munn and Daniel Levy. Maybe there was a lack of options. Maybe Thomas Frank, they were looking at maybe Frank, they felt maybe hadn't enough Premier League experience. There's been a couple more seasons that passed now. We've seen him lose the likes of Ivan Toney and still elevate Brentford up the league table. So maybe Frank's stock's higher now. And I think if you look at it, apparently he was interviewed for the Chelsea job last year. United have been watching him as well. So maybe they feel that Thomas Frank now, it's either you get him now or you lose him. He might go somewhere else. So was Thomas Frank the first choice? All the media reports are saying he is now. That's the kind of word that Spurs are putting out there. But there is reports saying that, they looked at Areola, they looked at De Zerbi as well, like you mentioned, Chris, and Glasner was another one mentioned, and they all seem to be committed to the projects they're on. So we'll never really know if he was first choice regardless. But in terms of what he'll improve, Chris, as this is when I was doing the lowdown on Thomas Frank, I think tactically we'll be a lot better. I think we'll go into games where opposition managers aren't really sure, or opposition analysts that are doing the work for the head coach or the manager, they won't be really sure what kind of system Spurs is going to play that day or how they're going to approach that game. I think that gives you a much better chance of winning a game, because they obviously have to come up with different plans. They try and gamble what we're going to try and do to them. Whereas I think under Ange, a lot of teams knew how we were going to set up, how we were going to play. And, these are professional analysts, professional coaches. And I don't want to say disrespect, but I think Ange was just a bit naive when it came to opposition. I think he just thought that it doesn't matter what they do, we'll do that. And I think Frank will have a totally different respect for the opposition. He'll possibly even respect the opposition more than he'll respect his own team. And if you look at it, I think Si mentioned earlier about the coaches of the league. If you look at a lot of the coaches that are in the top 6, top 7 teams, they're all very adaptable managers, maybe other than Pep. But Pep does change his tactics kind of season on season. But he's probably the only manager that he's reluctant to. He rarely makes subs, Guardiola at times. He tends to trust the starting 11 that day. But if you look at Arne Slot, very flexible manager. There's plenty of games this season where Liverpool surrendered possession and had teams in the counter-attack. Then there was other games they went with a high press and dominated teams at Anfield. Eddie Howe is very flexible in terms of when they play away from home. Newcastle, they be a bit more in a deep block and play counter-attack. Then at home, they swarm teams and use St James's Park to their advantage. Arteta's constantly changing his tactics. So there's a lot of managers up that top end of the league that are similar to Thomas Frank and being adaptable. And I think Ange is probably one of the managers that's maybe a bit like a Jose or a Conte or an Arsene Wenger in terms of he's very rigid and he's very stubborn and has beliefs and has systems. And look, I think there's, Ange has repeatedly said that, he wouldn't be at Spurs if he didn't stick to his beliefs. So why would he change? Whereas I think the modern day manager, even though Thomas Frank's 51, as Craig pointed out, I think he's more aligned to the new modern day managers as opposed to the old timers like Ange and Wengers and Contes and Mourinho's. And football's always changing, Chris. And I think that's why you see the likes of Conte and you see the likes of Jose, who are world-class managers in their day. You could even point to Conte, won the league with Napoli. But they're not at the top clubs anymore because of, they can't really see out a project anymore. It only really lasts 1 or 2 years and it breaks down because there's an inability or incapability of changing. Whereas I think Frank is very, very flexible. So in terms of the players that he'll improve, I think our way forwards made massive improvement. I know Brennan Johnson scored a lot of goals, but I think there's so much more to come from Johnson. And I think that's one of the biggest disappointments with Ange is how many players has improved under Ange. I think Pedro Porro is possibly the only one. I think of the other players, is Van de Ven better this year than he was last year when he came? I'm not sure. I think Romero's regressed under Ange. Udogie had a great start, but I don't think he's kicked on. Jed Spence come onto the team, started well, and then struggled. Bergvall, to be fair, looks like he's got star quality. He looks like a real talent. Archie Gray come on at the start, done well, then struggled. So it almost feels that a lot of players that are struggling haven't really gained that improvement from Ange. Solanke is another one, had a decent start, I know he had an injury, but he looks like another player that was crying out for a bit of support. And I think that'll be the main difference with Thomas Frank is the players, whilst they clearly loved Ange as a person, I'm not sure they were being coached as much as they should be at this level. And I think Thomas Frank brings that to the party, Chris.
One thing, Chris, can I just add there? Now, again, I don't know the source of this. It's only because he said it. Paul O'Keefe said that Levy categorically didn't want Postecoglou, but he left it to Munn so that he wouldn't be seen as meddling in the appointment. So, that was one of your questions there. So, what I still come back to this point. What does that say about Levy? I don't know, but just thought I'd chuck that in there, seeing as you mentioned it as a question.
We're now going to come on to the transfer part of this podcast. I'm going to come to each one of you and talk about one particular player. So I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to start with Heung-min Son. Al Hilal in Saudi are apparently very interested in Heung-min Son. Is this the time to see our Spurs captain leave, or would you like to keep him for another year?
For me, it's time for him to graciously leave, with the last thing he did in a Spurs shirt being to pick up the Europa League. Look, I love Sonny. As far as I'm concerned, he could stay at Spurs forever. However, the financial practicalities of this and the way that the team needs to develop, in my opinion, he didn't have his best season last year, regardless of the stats that went out there. The Son Heung-min that we saw last season was not the Son Heung-min that we've seen in seasons before. So for me, if Saudi come knocking and they pay a fee for him, I would rather take that and just have my last memory of him in a Spurs shirt holding that cup aloft. So for me, very simple. It's time for Sonny to move on.
Craig, let's come to you. TalkSport have stated today that Spurs and Everton have genuine interest in Manchester City and England star Jack Grealish. Newcastle are also interested, but it's unlikely that they're going to put a bid in for him. Now, how many times have we seen or heard this story about Spurs being linked to Jack Grealish? Would you like to see him in a Spurs shirt next season?
Oh, that's a tough one, because I've always loved Grealish as a player. When Villa were in the Championship, he was voted Championship Player of the Year, and he was still kind of going under the radar. People knew of him, but we offered 5-10 million or something. Didn't move quickly. Investors came in, and Villa said they were keeping him. And then obviously we know what happened. He went to Manchester City for £100 million. Yeah, as somebody said in the comments there, Grealish and Maddison on the Raz. Absolutely. I think Maddison, being a family man, I think he's probably not the party boy he was. But do
you know though, Craig? When Maddison signed, he almost said something along the lines of, I was born to play for Spurs, and a lot of Spurs fans have actually said that as well. I feel like Grealish is that type of player, and I feel like Grealish, you give him a handful of games, like if you put him in a Spurs shirt, that start of his, if he played well those first few games, the fans, I think, would absolutely adore him. Don't you think?
Look, I'm going to say yes to this, because I would take Jack Grealish. I would, because I'd be totally going against what I've always thought of him. I think he's a magnificent footballer. Obviously, he hasn't done it that much over the last season off, but really, how many chances has he had at City? He never really got a run in the team. So I think Josh has probably got a different view to me, but I would take, because we've always had that sort of player at Tottenham. We have, I'm a little bit older than perhaps Si's probably got a year or so on me, but we can go back to the
more
80s
than one.
and remember that these flair players we've always had. I mean, you can go back Waddle, Hoddle, Gaza, Bale. I could reel off a load of others, but we've always had that sort of player. I'm not sure who that player is at the moment. So I would take Grealish. I would, because he brings something different. He does bring something different. So I would 100% take him, but the money's got to be right. I wouldn't want to bring in Grealish if he's going to cost 80 million and then £300,000 a week on wages. No, thank you. But it's got to be a reasonable deal.
Yeah, I think it's very unlikely due to the wage demands. Josh, I know your feelings on Jack Grealish, so I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to come to you on a report from Sky today. They are stating that Spurs have stepped up their interest in Antoine Semenyo of Bournemouth. He scored 11 goals in the Premier League in 37 appearances last season. He's been at Bournemouth for 3 seasons, scoring 20 goals in 81 games in the Premier League. Manchester United are also interested and also on the list of Liverpool. Would you like to see Semenyo on in a Spurs shirt next year?
Semenyo was certainly impressive last season. There were many times where I thought, I never expected him to step up in the way that he did under Anthony Iraola. But if the question is Semenyo or Brian Mbeumo, then I'm taking Mbeumo all day long, and I'm praying that we get Frank over the line ASAP in enough time to try and hijack this deal that Man United want, irrespective of the wages. Couldn't care less about his wage demands, whether he's in it for the money or not. Pay him. Well,
sorry to burst your bubble, Josh, but the Daily Mail in the last hour have stated that a hijack for Mbeumo is extremely unlikely for Tottenham. It looks like he's going to go to Manchester United.
Well, whatever the papers say, and I know I used to work for them. But regardless of that, it's irrespective, right? What matters is when things actually happen. We're being linked, and it's ironic me saying this because I've been doing these videos kind of each day. But but sorry to interrupt. Isn't wages going to play a key part here? That Spurs are not going to pay that top level of wage like a team like Manchester United will do, despite them having not much money. But if that's the case, then, there's no point talking about any of these players, because any player of real, genuine quality is going to want to be paid an awful lot of money. And, the type of money that Jack Grealish is on is double that of Brian Mbeumo. So, as far as I'm concerned, I keep out of the finances of it. We've got to do something different this summer. And the only reason why I was laughing when Craig was on about Grealish was because, not laughing about the prospect of Grealish, I can weirdly see the appeal, and I'm with you, Chris, in that he would be loved for sure. But it was someone made a comment about think about the bomb that Daniel Levy would make selling all those Alice bands, and that made me chuckle.
Imagine though, Josh, right? Imagine Eze, Grealish, and Mbeumo coming in.
Happening.
But I'm saying that's the sort of players we need to be going for, surely, isn't it? And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Comes full circle and back to what I was saying. We need to be going for these sort of players. Put down a statement. We won't, of course, because we're Tottenham, but you have to dream.
Craig, you said about a flair player. The one for me is Eze. It's got to be Eze.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say exactly that. Is if you could give me 2 players of real quality, I'd want Eze and I'd want Mbeumo. Those would be the 2 that I'd go for, and then see what we can do around that. Well,
£68 million for Eze. That's all it takes, Josh.
He's worth it. He's worth it. If I would much rather see Spurs go out and spend, say Romero left, right? Say Romero left the club. I'd rather see Spurs go all out on Gay, Eze, and Mbeumo, and then we sign maybe 1 or 2 other cheaper players, than sign 3 or 4 mid-range players that aren't as good. This is about us going and buying players who are going to genuinely improve our starting 11.
Yeah.
And the players that are currently starting for us, some of those players we should be looking to demote to the bench and have as options, because right now we don't have a bench that's capable of. We all remember what happened when we played Bayern Munich in the Champions League. We'll be seeing that will be rinse and repeat in the Champions League next season if we do not go and buy players that will immediately improve our starting 11.
Totally agree.
Gareth, let's come to you. Christian Romero, what do you think is going to happen with the Romero situation in the summer? Of course, he did criticise the board a couple of months ago, which probably wouldn't have gone down well internally. And Ange Postecoglou spoke about that in a press conference as well, dealing with it internally. But Spurs also being linked with Mark Gay, but other reports have stated that he doesn't want to join, despite Spurs putting in an offer in the January transfer window and it being rejected. And Spurs also being... or they're interested in Everton star Jared Branthwaite. Do you think that could materialise? But overall, do you think that Romero is leaving?
I get that feeling that Romero's done his time. I think one in the Europa League as well, he was out on a high. And I think as well, Chris, in terms of sellable assets, he's high up there. I think you can get a good fee for him. Sometimes I get the feeling with Romero that he's not that interested in being here. I know he played well in the final, but I think he's one of those players that turns up when he wants to. Now, I'm not sure he's completely committed to Spurs, as opposed to being committed when he plays for Argentina. And I do think there's he makes a lot of mistakes as well at times. Concentration, I think he's obviously a good defender, but I think he should be better than what he is. I don't know if that's down to coaching or whatever, but I think concentration-wise, he sleeps and he ball watches, and I think sometimes it's hard to fix those things in an experienced player. So I think if they can get somewhere in the region of 70, 75 million for Romero, they may feel that it's good money and they take it and they use that, then they beef up the squad. You have mentioned some names there, Eze and Buemo are two that definitely come under the starting 11. But
yeah,
we all know the issues with the wage budget, Chris. But they're also as well, you do sit and think about it, as Mbeumo, a £250,000 a week player, I'm not so sure if he is. I'm not sure you're getting the value there for that player. I don't think the transfer fees is much of an issue. I think it's the wages. I read somewhere that Spurs would be prepared to offer him 130,000 a week plus bonuses. But if United's offering him 250,000, I don't think there's another club in the league would offer Mbeumo £250,000 a week.
But Gareth, would it make a difference if Thomas Frank is there? And he would like to, work with Thomas Frank again. Plus, Spurs should have that pool of Champions League football. But of course, people keep telling me, a lot of ex-footballers keep telling me it's all about the money, which I hate to hear as a fan, because for me, it's like, well, you're going to be playing Champions League football, but of course, some players, I hope not all, some players will chase the money.
One of the things that Ange said about players coming to the club, I really agreed with, that they have to come to Spurs because they want to be here, not because we're in the Champions League or not because we're going to pay a certain amount of money to them. They want to come here and be part of something special. And I think if you're offering, I think we're in a much better state than Manchester United as a club. The squad's a lot better than Man United. There's a real mess with players there. You couldn't. I think our players are a lot more committed to the Spurs project than the United one. There's a lot of poor characters in that United dressing room. So I think if Mbeumo is rejecting Spurs to go to Man United, I think then that tells you all about that player. He is a likeable player on the pitch, but if he's solely driven by the money, it's a bit like some of those players that are going to Saudi Arabia. Inzaghi going to Saudi Arabia, I'm thinking, you were just in the Champions League final. Why not stay in Europe? Why are you going to Saudi Arabia? So I think that's the type of characteristics that we spoke about, Chris. If that's what's driving Mbeumo to Manchester United, then he's probably not the right player for us now.
I would just jump in on that, though, because I think there is still a fair point to be made about Manchester United is still a romantic club for a lot of people, especially if players of that age, who when they were kids, Man United was that glory team under Fergie, right? Man United is still a massive club. And Man United have gone and they've got Cunha. They're in talks for Gyökeres as well.
But if you look at their last 50 signings, Manchester United, Josh, you could probably count in one hand.
Man United have had all sorts of problems, right? But if you're a player that grew up supporting Man United, or you have that romantic view of Man United, and you think you could be a player that is going to change things for them, I kind of still get that pull. I think maybe if we're having this conversation in 10 years' time and the players that are going will have never known a good Man United side, it's a different thing altogether. But the other thing that's worth mentioning here, this links to what Si said earlier and about the money. Spurs and our wage to revenue ratio. We have one of the lowest wage to revenue ratios in Europe, full stop, not just in the Premier League. amongst all of the top teams in Europe. And that wage structure is not something we're forced into. FFP and that's not what's going on here. This is a choice by the board. The board are choosing to not pay top wages to top players like other big clubs do. That is a choice. So if Spurs are going to be serious and we're going to get real and try and compete on all fronts, we're going to have to break the wage structure anyway, because you're never going to get a high enough caliber of players in without breaking that wage structure anyway.
Yeah, Chris, one of the things I would say is I think at Spurs, the wages like Son, Lloris, Harry Kane, you have to earn that wage at Spurs. And I don't think any other top club operates like that. You know, they go and sign players that are of high caliber and they take a chance on the wages. Now, I don't agree with Man United. Every player going to Man United now is getting £250,000 a week. I don't think that's sustainable. You know, I think Daniel Levy, for all his critics, the one thing that he does say in a lot of his statements is we will not gamble with the sustainability of this football club. You look at Aston Villa, they've gambled in the market and now they have to sell, they buy because they've missed out in the Champions League. Do we want to be in a position like that as well? Definitely not. So there is a fine balance between, you know, relaxing the purse strings, but also not leaving yourself in a mess or vulnerable. Yeah. You have to sell your best players. So there is a trade-off and we have to get that balance right, like Josh has said. And unfortunately, with Josh is right. We will never attract the top players, you know, paying them 50 or 60 grand a week when they come in the door and then tell them, look, if you're a star player in 2 or 3 years' time, we'll give you £200,000 a week. The top players want to be on the top wages, and that's just what you have to do. So there needs to be a balance, like Josh said, where maybe you can only sign 2 top players per window, and they are 3 or 4 players have to be your kind of average middle of the road player. But if you're, you know, when is the last time we've signed a star name? We don't even bring in one a window. So I think in this window we need at least two players that come in, that get us off our seats, get us excited, and you can genuinely say that, you know, there's a change in terms of going for the top players. Because, I mean, you know, no one's delusional enough to, Christy, say we're going to sign 5 world-class players in the one window. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's one other point on this, though, and we all forget this. We do all forget this. So let's just say whatever we do for a job, someone comes along and says, I will give you double to do your job that somebody else is doing. Which job are we all going to take? Honestly, it's not. I'm not saying it's up by a little bit. It's double the money. And for some of these guys, they're one injury away from never playing again, aren't they? So if someone's going to offer you 250,000 and the other guy's going to offer you 130, I don't care who you are. You would say, unfortunately, I'm going to go with the bigger offer. They're just human beings. It's human nature.
You don't see testimonials anymore, Si, do you? There's no loyalty.
Dear old Ben, who's even signed up again. We're not even giving him a testimonial, are we?
This is exactly. You've teed me up really nicely there, Si, because that's exactly where I was going to go. Ben Davies. Now, Tottenham have triggered this 12-month extension, keeping him at the club for another year. But lots of reports, including one from the Daily Mail, stating that Spurs could end up selling him and getting a fee. What would you like to see happen to Ben Davies?
I'd like Ben to go and we get a fee, because for 2 reasons for that. One, I would think, and again, I could be way off the mark here, but only from stuff I've seen of him in videos and stuff like that. That man is a totally honourable man. And if he thought he could benefit the football club he loves by them getting a fee for him, bearing in mind the wages that they paid him for all the years he's been there, I'm pretty certain dear old Ben would say, yes, of course, I'll sign a contract so that you can sell me. Now, for me, Ben Davies shouldn't be there. And it leads me to that central left back cover position. Let's just say we have a good year next year. You are going to be playing 50 games. Okay, so you've got 38 league games. Let's say 1 in each cup, and you're going to be playing 8 in the Champions League. So that's nigh on 50 games. And if you're saying to me that we're going to play Van der Ven in 50 of them games, I don't believe you. And also, nor should we. But what you've got to have is someone like an Enquiries there, who is a like-for-like player to cover to cover Mickey van der Ven. So whether you're playing on a Wednesday in the Champions League or Premier League on a Saturday, the level of that position does not drop. And whether Romero stays or not, to me, I think he's going to go. And if he wants to go, that's fine. But for me, if you've got, you know, a Dragusin or a Danso coached under Thomas Frank, they're more than adequate at right centre back in a 4 or a 5 or 3 if you're going to pay 5 at the back. So, and also you've got youngsters like Phillips and Vuskovic around if you really want to keep someone else to back it up. But you cannot go like for like without someone like an Nkapia to back up Van der Ven. And for me, we have one other issue that I think we should fix. We need a fourth. You know, it's all about compromise, isn't it? We need a full fullback. For me, go and get Kyle Walker-Peters. Not that he's a great player, not that he's going to set the world on fire, but he will do a job for you. But also, he opens up another space in your Champions League squad because he's one of our homegrown players. And we've just lost Alfie Whiteman, so that means the only one we'd have next year would be Brandon Austin, who can go into the Champions League squad, and we're restricted to 17. Was it 20 other players plus one? It would be 23 if we get another homegrown player in. You've got to box clever, haven't you?
You've teed me up nicely to the next question as well, Si. Thank you so much. Yeah, brilliant. Right, so I'm going to ask you last questions now of the night. So, what do we need in this summer transfer window, and what are your expectations? And Craig, I was going to come to you on this point, and Si teed me up nicely, because when we do have Romero and Van der Ven in this team, we are a very, very different team, and the stats speak for themselves as well under Postecoglou, particularly last season when they were injury-free. You know, when we have the likes of Danso, Dragusin, Ben Davis, etc. in the team, there have been very different results. We have seen various reports stating that we are interested in Mark Gay of Crystal Palace, Jared Branthwaite of Everton. Also, lots of reports over the last couple of years about Evan Ndika of Roma. Seen that one, you know, quite a few times. In terms of positions, you know, feel free, all of you, to give me the positions you think that we need strengthening in, or even names, or even both. Up to you, Craig. What do you think? Because where do we need to strengthen in this squad? Because Si is absolutely right, and I've said this on various editions of the Spurs Chat podcast or the Tottenham News editions that we put out, that, you know, you virtually need 2 teams. The strength in depth needs to be absolutely top notch, especially, like the board say, we want to be fighting on all cylinders.
Yes. We are short in a number of positions. I think goalkeeper's fine at the moment. Right back, if you're putting Spence in at right back, that's fine. Centre back, I'd argue we're well stocked. Still don't rate Dragusin, but he's okay, I would say, as cover. Once they're all 4 fit, if Ben Davies stays around, that's 5. Depends what happens with Romero. We've got to bring in a monster centre back if Romero goes. So that is one position for me. We've got to definitely strengthen. Left back, 100%. We need cover for Udogie. I know Spence can do it, but I want to specialise left back or right back if they see Spence as a better left back. 100% agree. I was coming on to the midfield general. Yes, we do. We need a monster 6. Really want a decent, experienced holding midfield player. I think we've been crying out for one this year. And you have got Archie Gray as backup to that. And obviously we've seen other players can play there. Bentancur, Bissouma, although Bissouma may well be on his way. I just want to see more strengthening across the attack as well, like your Eze's. I'm not even going to mention it, Grealish again, because it probably winds up Josh too much. But I'll just go for Eze now.
I don't hate the guy, honestly. I really don't. I think there are better players out there.
Probably players that we won't get, even along with Grealish, because we know what it's like. And what I don't want, and I perhaps I'm I am hoping. I know I'm hoping. I don't want to be sat here on a podcast beginning of September, and Chris, you asking me, have we done enough? And I know what my answer is going to be already. You know, what's your ranking of the transfer window? And I know it's going to be a 6 or a 7 at most, because it always is. It's every bloody year. It's the same thing. And that is what I come back to. If you want to compete in the Champions League and not just crash out of the group stage because of this new format, we've got to strengthen this squad. We've got to strengthen this squad with quality. So I've just mentioned, I'll let the other guys jump in now, but I think we're probably all on the same page. We know what we want. It's just if the club backs the manager.
Oh,
Chris, you're on mute, mate.
Let me just ask you before we move on. Richarlison and Basuma, keep or sell?
I'd probably say thank you very much for being part of the final team, but send them both on their way. But absolutely, let me just say, Basuma was good in the final, and Richarlison was probably the best game I've seen from him in the Spurs shirt. So fair play to both of them, especially Richarlison.
Josh, let's come to you then. Is there anyone that we haven't mentioned that you'd like to see in a Spurs shirt under the new manager? And what are your expectations for the window?
I think I'd sign half the Crystal Palace team. I think I'd take Henderson, I'd take Mitchell, I'd take Wharton, I'd take Mateta, Eze, and Mark Gay. I think I'd take all of them. Yeah, we need a 6. I think, as far as I'm concerned, again, it's all well and good saying this because it's all dependent on how much money the board is prepared to spend. And a lot of the players that I would want to see in a Spurs shirt are probably going to be far too expensive for Daniel Levy. But in the sort of 6 role, I'd like to see one of Wharton or Baleba. Those would be the 2. Premier League experience, performed at the highest level. That would be the type of player I'd go for. Mark Gay as a must at centre-back. And then I think we need another striker. I quite like the idea of, if we're going to get Frank, bring in Johan Wissa, because he's a very different type of striker to Solanke. He's very acrobatic. He's quick. He scores different types of goals and would probably be slightly cheaper than some of the others. But I think, you know, someone that's already worked with Frank, that Frank knows and trusts, can only be a good thing. And Mbeumo, as I've mentioned. And yeah, as I said briefly, someone like Tyreek Mitchell. But I think it's very difficult because we need to not be sentimental here. We need to be brutally honest. And, that means taking tough decisions over current starting players. Even with our strongest 11, we still weren't winning many games of football this year. And I know, obviously, we didn't have many games with our strongest 11, but we still finished 17th. So I think there's definitely room for improvement. But as Craig mentioned, it's, we all know who we want. It's just whether the board goes and does something they haven't done before. But fundamentally, we have to be going for players that will improve our starting 11. I don't want to see us go and buy players to be backup. I want to see us buy starters, and then that forces the players that already are starting to hopefully step up and feel like their place is under threat and fight for that. That competition is massively important. And if you look at all the top squads, they've got that competition, in spades.
Josh, I don't know whether this is going to be an obvious question or not, because I seem to ask this question to whoever comes on the podcast every single transfer window. What is the definition of backing the manager?
The definition of backing the manager is going and buying players that the manager wants to bring in. And it means giving the manager the best chance to, and actually, we'll go back to what the board said. The board, in their message and their reasoning behind sacking Postecoglou, was wanting a team that can compete on all fronts. Backing the manager is giving him players that allows him to compete on all fronts. The board have set that expectation for themselves now. So therefore, they've got to now go and put their money where their mouth is and go and bring in players that will allow us to compete on all fronts.
Gareth, let's come to you. What are your expectations for the window, and are there any players that we haven't spoken about yet? And also, what I wanted to ask you about is you brought up a great point earlier about Archie Gray. Of course, it did look like he was going to be signing for Thomas Frank at Brentford. Surely he's going to be a winner in all of this if Thomas Frank does take over at Spurs. And how do you think that he will use him?
Yeah, Chris, I think it's going to be a big summer of change. I think you'll see Richarlison, Basuma, Son, Romero as well, I think, could all move on. Ben Davis will move on, I think. So I think just going from logically, we're going to need at least one top centre-back to come on, preferably a left-footed centre-back. Or if it's Romero that goes, can you get someone that's capable of playing on both sides? I think Braithwaite is going to be a player that Thomas Frank likes. He likes quite tall, physical defenders, and Braithwaite can play with his feet as well. But I think Braithwaite would cost a lot of money. I think they're looking for about 75, 80 million. So, if you'd need to be getting the same for Romero if you're going to go and buy Braithwaite. Davis, I think if you can get 5 to 10 million for him, it will be a good sale. And maybe invest that into a left back that can compete with you, Doggy. You probably need to put some more money on top of that, but a left back that can come on and help you, Doggy, because like Craig says, I think we need 2 players to play on the right and 2 players to play on the left. Midfield, I think it's well flagged. One of our marquee signings has got to be a top drawer, number 6. A signing where teams go, oh, do you see who went to Spurs there? That's an unbelievable signing. I think there's a lot of names out there. I think, Cardozo was linked, but it looks like he wants to stay in Spain. But I think Ederson at Atalanta would be a fantastic signing. There's a lot of links with Saudi Arabia for him. But I think he's available for around 50 million euros, so it's not crazy money. I'm sure he's not on massive wages at Atalanta, so it's definitely a deal we could do. There's a lot of talk about Adam Morton in the chat here. I think you're probably looking at crazy money for him, but about 100 million. And look, talented player, but again, is he worth that kind of money? I'm not sure. It could be in the future, but that's a big gamble on that one player. In terms of the striker situation, I really hope, but I don't think so. I would send Tell back to Bayern Munich. I don't really see the value in spending 30 to 35 million on him. I haven't seen enough. I would like to see someone like João Pedro come on. I think he would be a massive upgrade. Premier League experience, like Josh says. He can play off the left. He can play as a 10. He can play as a striker. A different kind of striker. He's Solanke as well. And as well, he's nasty. And we haven't got enough players like that. And I think if you're losing Richarlison, you're upgrading him with a better player in João Pedro, and also somebody that can replicate that kind of shithousery that João Pedro can do. He winds players up, and we probably need someone like that in our squad. And I think it's well documented that we're looking for like a left-footed player that plays on the wing on the right side. Who that'll be, I'm not sure. Josh is a big fan of Mbeumo, but it looks like United are looking at him. So I'm sure there's plenty of options out there for that type of player. But I think in those areas specifically, I think the centre half, if Romero goes, the number 6, and the striker or the wide attacker, that's got to be our 3 marquee signings. And they don't have to be world class, but they have at least got to be top class with the potential of being world class. 3 players where they come in the door and you go, what a signing. And you start to feel confident about our chances. If we don't get 3 players like that, I'm struggling to see how we're going to compete next year on all fronts, because we're desperate for ready-made quality and players that can come on and take this team to the next level. So I think if you get 3 top players in those areas, and then you build around that with like a half decent left back that can cover, maybe a backup for Ben Davis leaving. So I'm looking to see at least 5 or 6 players come on, Chris, and 3 of them have got to be of top quality.
This is exactly why what you said there is why I don't want to play like Dibbling from Southampton, because Dibbling is the classic Tottenham young player. He did nothing that really impressed me. He looked okay. He looked fine. He looked better than what they have, but he certainly didn't pull up trees last season. He didn't do anything extraordinary, and you would expect a player of that, that's being talked about, the sort of price tag that's been linked with him, and that age, he would have performed at least a heck of a lot better than he did. So we need proven players. And another one actually that I didn't mention at centre back, if you're looking at sort of left-sided centre back, Murillo at Nottingham Forest.
Josh, I'm going to throw it out there as well. You know who my dream signing would be this summer? And it's probably unlikely. Morgan Rogers. I think he would be an unbelievable signing. I think he's a very special talent. I think that will be the one. Villa are they need to sell, they buy. And I think more if you're going to spend 100 million on a player, I think he's the one that's potentially going to be a world-class superstar. I just love the way he carries the ball, plays in the back turn, plays in the back foot. He can play off the left. He can play in the middle. He's a very buzzy player, and you only have to look at what he did to PSG in the Champions League. You know, he was unbelievable that night. And I think if you're doing it at that level, I think he's the one player out there that could possibly be available because of Aston Villa's struggles. And I think Morgan Rogers would be like we always talk about Tottenham players. I think that real maverick, that real kind of, you know, we talk about the players Craig mentioned there, like your Ginolas and your Gareth Bales. I think Morgan Rogers has got that real special ability and there's more to come from him. And I think we did track him in the past, Chris, and obviously went to Villa. So there's been small links to him. I know I hear Liverpool's looking at him as well. But I think if you throw 100 million down for Morgan Rogers, you get him, because I think Villa have to sell. And I don't think they're going to get the money they would have got for Watkins a few years ago because of his age. I think Watkins is 29 now. Morgan Rogers might be the one that has to make way for Villa, and if we've got to be at the table if that becomes available.
Lucan here says Milenkovic, and Andy says Tottenham need to go and sign Matoma. Gareth, just give me 3 very, very quick answers on these 3 points. Jamie Donnelly, do Spurs keep him or another loan? Josh Keeley, and where do you see the position overall for Archie Gray if it was Thomas Frank taking over?
Jamie Donnelly, I think we've seen enough to suggest that he's not far away from being a Premier League player, so I think he would be worth keeping around. Josh Keeley, haven't seen enough of him. I'm sure Craig's probably seen more. I know he's Irish, but he looks like a bit of a mustard. He looks like, especially in them penalties as well, he looks like a nasty type of player, and I think that's always good to have that around. So
he is Gareth. We've got to keep Josh Keeley at all costs. 100%.
He winds people up. He winds people up. So if he's better than Brandon Austin, which I'm sure they'll be looking at, then I would keep Josh Keeley as well as a backup goalkeeper to Vicario. And Archie Gray, Chris, I probably should have mentioned that. I remember you asked me before. I think Archie Gray was going to be signed. He was signed as a midfielder here. I think Brentford would have been signing him as a midfielder. So I think that'll be where they're looking to play him. I think he needs more game time on there. But I do sense with Archie Gray that he'll get a lot more coaching off Thomas Frank than he would have done off Ange. I think he really struggled at times towards the back end of the season. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes on. But I do think that Archie Gray is a wee bit short of, you know, the likes of Bergville. I think Bergville's ready to play at the top level. I think Archie Gray needs a bit more nurturing and a bit more coaching. And he'll probably get there as well. So fascinated to see how these young players get on around Thomas Frank. I think Thomas Frank could take Lucas Bergville to the next level, to be honest. I think he'll be the one they watch next year. I think you could see him go from he's already at a good level, but I think he could be the potential world-class player in the squad.
Yeah, I agree, Gareth. In a couple of years, I think he's going to be an absolute superstar. Won all the awards, didn't play or didn't start that many Premier League games either, and still won all of the awards at the club. So lastly with you about the transfer window, and I feel like it is important to say as well, and I know you love your finances, but when we have seen in past windows, when Spurs have gone big and spent big money on players, and I'll name 2, Ndombele, Lo Celso, it hasn't always worked out. And I know there are a lot of fans, not just Spurs fans, but football fans in general, they go, just spend the money, go and spend big. It don't always work out, does it, when you go and spend big money? It's about the right recruitment. Are you confident that we have the right recruitment team to then go and get those key players that we desperately need for next season?
Yeah, I think we do with Johan Langer and the head of performance that Frank's going to bring with him from Brentford, because there's rave reviews about that guy. But so I think we can do it. For me, you know, I can name you 2 players for every position that I'd like us to have next season, and then you could compete on both fronts. So I'm going to go for Vicario and Kinski, then I'm going to go for right back Jed Spence and Pedro Porro. Right centre back, I'm going with Danso and Dragusin or Vuskovic, dependent on who goes from there. Left centre back, I'm going for VDV and Incapia, and then for my left backs, I'm going with a doggy and Maxim de Kuiper from Club Bruges. Then I'm going central midfield. I wouldn't mind us either having Polina or Edison and Archie Gray. Then my 8s are going to be Burval and Bentancur. My 10s are going to be Kulusevski and Madison. My left wing is going to be Eza and Odobert. Centre forward, I'm going for Solanke and Jonathan David. And on the right side, I'm going for Brennan Johnson and Brian Mbuemo. And if those two, you know, all those positions can't cut it in all those competitions, then I'll be amazed. I'm also going to keep Donnelly around. Like I said, I'm going to keep Vuskovic around, and Keeley out on loan for me, Lancashire out on loan for me. I think that would cut it. That would cut it.
I've just worked it out to be 7 signings.
Yeah, but it needs it. But don't forget, you're going to be losing out of that the players that I'm saying there. You've got Romero going. You're going to have Ben Davis going. You're going to have Tell going or not being. You've got Sonny going. You've got Basuma going. There's
Werner's wages too coming off the wage bill.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned Romero going, but you're saying Danzo and Dragusin.
I said
surely.
No, but I said Vuskovic maybe. I don't know, but if we may have to plug a gap there. But I just think that Dragusin would be better under a coach like Frank than he has been under Ange. That's my rationale there. But we're not going to see him until Christmas anyway, and we're not going to see Kulusevski till Christmas either. So that's why I'm saying I keep people like Donnelly, Vuskovic around, give them some game time. We've not mentioned other players going. We've got Alfie Dorrington to make a decision on, haven't we? We've got Alfie Devine to make a decision on. So, you know,
we're going to get decent money for Solomon too. He's going to need it.
Yeah, solid. But he's going to go. So all I'm saying, Chris, with 7 signings coming in from the first team, in my opinion, there's 5 going to go, and we're always saying that we're too short Tottenham. So for me, I'm giving you 7 so that we're not too short Tottenham.
Yeah. Reports are stating that we could be keeping Manor Solomon for pre-season. And so our last question for you. Yeah. Reports are stating that Timo Werner's available for €4 million. We couldn't, could we?
Yeah, no, we couldn't. And what I think we should do, if as an act of mercy, we should
that
pay
was
the
a joke. That was a joke, by the way.
No, we should pay the transfer fee to him to go somewhere else and not us. How about this? As part of the Frank deal, we pay the £4 million for them to have Werner. How about that?
Chris, where's Brian Hull's next loan going to be?
Where's what?
Brian Hull's next loan going to be?
Well, that's
on loan again, probably.
Gareth, I'll tell you what. You guys have been absolutely fantastic. You've all brought something different to this podcast this evening. Absolutely unbelievable. And honestly, I could talk to you guys all night because I feel like there are a lot of players we haven't discussed. There's a lot of things we haven't discussed. So we'll have to have you all back again next week to talk about it all again. Craig, thank you so much for your work that you've done on this podcast and all of the background work that you do on this channel.
No problem at all. Always a pleasure. Mostly a pleasure, even when Spurs are doing your head in like they normally do. But yeah, look, we're kind of used to it. I mean, I was trying to think today, are any other clubs as mental as Tottenham Hotspur? Their fans would probably say yes, but I think we take the biscuit, don't we? It does drive us mad, but, you know, you're kind of stuck with them, and yeah, so we just, you know, hold on to that hope that another trophy is not another 17 years away and we can put another one in the cabinet. Might even do it in August, who knows? But yeah, always a pleasure to come on, Chris. And I'll leave it there. Thanks everyone for watching. Nearly 4,000 of you. Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, 12,000 people have watched this podcast already this evening. So thank you so much for sticking with us. And Craig, thanks so much for all of your work. Josh, you've been great this evening. Thanks so much for coming on. What are you up to at the moment, and where can people find you? And I know you can be found on this channel every day at the moment because you're doing these transfer news videos, which are extremely popular.
Well, that is what I'm up to at the minute. Just praying for a miracle at Spurs. I'm fully aboard the Thomas Frank train. I hope everyone else is now after Gareth's analysis and Craig's player stats. But no, I think, to be honest, all we want is just a normal week as a Spurs fan for once.
Please.
It's boring.
Just one normal week. We'll end up with Tell. We'll end up with Tell, won't we? That'll be our winner.
Josh, it's not going to take a lot, though, is it? It's not going to take a lot to get this fan base on a high again, because once a manager is appointed and once the signings start coming in and everyone can see that, the manager is getting what the club need and driving the club forward, we hope, the fan base will be up on a high again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is it. It's just all we need is one. We bring the manager in, a couple of statement signings, and I think everything changes. It's not always like that with Spurs. I'm looking forward to seeing Brian Hill starting with Matthijs Tel as our two wingers next season. But yeah, at Josh Hughes TV for anyone that wants to listen to the waffle on anymore on Twitter.
You can't end like that. Eze, yeah.
Please.
Gareth, thank you so much for all of your input. You've been great. And where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on that at Gareth Hotspurs there on X. Usually
or in the dark. Podcast. We can find Gareth in the dark.
Somebody asked me, is there a power cut? It's actually not quite dark now. So it's my birthday tomorrow, Chris. So I'm hoping for a Thomas Frank announcement. For my birthday. So
it's my birthday tomorrow.
Is it?
It's my birthday tomorrow as well. That's weird.
Right.
It's not.
We had this discussion last year.
Yeah,
that's right. We had this
good
discussion
day.
last year.
How old are you turning, Gareth?
28 tomorrow.
Go, baby.
Yeah.
Well, have a great birthday tomorrow, Gareth. Have a great birthday tomorrow, Craig. Hopefully you'll get everything you would like.
I'm 30. I'm 30.
But no, you said on Monday night, Chris. I'm always available, so usually Monday night's a good night for me on the show. So I love when we do these Monday night football shows, because when there's no football on the TV, a Monday night podcast is just hard to beat. Yeah, this is the Spurs Chat podcast, Gareth. I know you always think it's Monday night football. We're far from being Sky Sports. But thank you so much for your input. You're always on Sky Sports now. Only when things are going wrong. So hopefully, things will start going right. Yeah. Si, thanks so much for all of your input. You've been great. Where can people find you? What are you up to at the moment?
Well, you can see it on the screen there. I'm always prattling on Twitter about things Spurs and things going on in the nation. So, I'm happy to be on there. I'd like to wish the boys happy birthday for tomorrow.
Yes.
Always a pleasure to be on with everybody, and thoroughly enjoy it. The other thing is, I just want everybody to say there's no point us keep lamenting over our dear Ange, because that ship has sailed. So what we've got to do is all focus behind the new manager, support the team, and make sure that we roar them onto another trophy next year. That's where I'd like to see it.
What a way to end the podcast. Well said, Si. Yes. Craig, Josh, Gareth, Sire, thank you so much for all of your input. You've been great, as I've said. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening. Your support is always incredible. So thank you so much for all of your feedback and all of the emails, etc., that you do send me. If you are interested in coming on a future fan show, please send me an email, tottenhamfanchris@gmail.com, and it will be a pleasure having you on, giving your thoughts about Tottenham Hotspur. Anyway, enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you on the next one. Until then, come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.